Good evening, everyone. Welcome. You're at the Carroll Community Speaker Series. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We are here with Alex Hirshberg, who is our consulting psychologist. He's going to talk to us all more about building resilience, specifically with children who have language-based learning challenges and how that's even more complicated. Before I tell you a little bit more about Alex's background and overview the talk, I just wanted to take care of some housekeeping matters. We have disabled the chat for this discussion tonight. However, we would love to hear from you, comments and questions. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, we're all kind of primed from COVID. There's the Q&A button. So at any point during the talk tonight, please pop your questions in. We plan to leave time at the end to answer as many as we can. And should we not get to all questions, we'll make sure to get back to you on email. So thank you so much for joining us. So as I said, I'm here with Alex Hirshberg. Alex is a clinical psychologist who's been consulting with Carroll. He spent the last several years in consultation with dozens of districts across Massachusetts around professional development, private consultation, and assessment. Alex has a doctorate from the Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology. And tonight he's here to talk to us to provide a deeper understanding of resilience, why stress is good under certain circumstances, and how parents can help their kids cultivate resilience, independence, self-advocacy, and positive coping skills. Alex will also discuss about anxiety and depression and how this can be more pronounced in populations such as kids who attend Carroll. And finally, what parents can do at home to support productive struggle. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Alex. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that introduction, Stacy. Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you here virtually. So the talk today is building resilience, right, in children with dyslexia, language-based learning disabilities. There's a great parenting quote that I really like that I like to lead off my talk with, right? This quote, "Prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child," is really a good summary of my main message for this evening, which is that all children, right, all children, but especially those who are neurodiverse, will face obstacles in their life. And in order for them to experience confidence and build that inner sense of self-reliance, they have to figure out how to navigate the road for themselves. And one of the challenges that we as parents face is we see our child engaging in struggle, experiencing frustration, is that pull to try to change the road for them, right? And so today is really about how do we understand the benefits of allowing children and providing that opportunity for children to learn how to ride on that road, right? And what we as parents can do. So a bit of a learning agenda for tonight. So the first thing is the first argument as I'm going to make is that we have a bit of a negative relationship with stress. And I want to set that right. I want to say I'm going to argue that stress is actually a good thing to an extent and is very helpful. It serves us very well, improves our performance, and contributes to resilience. And in fact, without stress, we would not be resilient. Then I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the unique challenges that our more neurodiverse learners, such as those with language-based learning disabilities, face when attempting to gain mastery over academics. And so it really raises the stakes a little bit for building that resilience, right? Our neurodiverse learners are more likely to face the obstacles and need to overcome them in order to build that resilience. And then we're going to talk about how Carroll School goes about supporting students building resilience, as well as what you can do as parents. And I'm going to give you sort of an overview and some examples And really what I want, um, my hope is that all parents walk away tonight with this idea of, when I see my child experiencing frustration, right? Um, Facing an obstacle, I want you all to feel good about that, to see that this is an opportunity that my child has to grow as a person, to become more resilient, and to learn how to be in the world and overcome stress. Right. So these are opportunities, and not things to shy away from. So I have a couple things to say here. One is that every day I get to wake up and I get to be a psychologist. And there was a time in my life where I had a lot of friends who really enjoyed talking to me about their problems and having me listen. And then when it was my turn to talk about my problems, they weren't as interested anymore, right? And so I sort of discovered, oh gosh, maybe I'm kind of good at this, and so I'll be a psychologist. Um, Now, uh, in school, there were a lot of things that I learned very quickly that I wasn't good at, right? That would not be a good job. For example, I knew from an early on, when my parents asked me which way was north, and I pointed to the sky, that that I was probably not fit to be an architect, right? That my spatial awareness is a weakness of mine. And so as an adult, I don't have to do geometry, right? I don't have to learn about biology and memorize all the facts about different species. Um, I don't. All I have to know is um, being a psychologist, right? And of course, part of being a child is being exposed to all sorts of things that are new, right? Learning new things, new experiences. And with that, right, with all that novelty, coupled with the developing body and mind, which hasn't mastered everything, there is bound to be failure, right? All of us will have to experience and overcome failure at one point or another, because none of us is built to be a good psychologist, a good architect, a good English professor, right? A good biologist. We're not all perfect at everything. So we're going to face challenges. In addition, all of us can reflect upon our own lives and recognize that disappointment is something that has happened to us regularly, that the world does not unfold as we always expect it to, right? Um, and so, because children's development is really all about facing novelty, failure, disappointment, frustration, what it means to develop as a child is really about learning how to manage the reality that these emotions are a part of life, right? Um, and if we reflect on our own lives now, right, it would be great to imagine that we are just filled with glee and joy at all times, right? And we don't have to face uncomfortable emotions. But the reality is that life can be hard, right? As someone who does a lot of traveling, and I go on Route 2 a lot, and I'm just stuck in traffic and nothing's moving, right? Life can be hard. Life can be filled with obstacles, and so we all have to face and overcome these emotions and figure out ways to keep on going. And that's what we have to cultivate in our children, right? That's why we can't just prepare the road for the child. That's why we have to help teach the child to navigate that road on their own. Another benefit of stress is actually that it improves performance. So what you're looking at here is the relationship between arousal or stress and performance, right? And so what you'll see in the green there is the optimal arousal, that we actually need stress in order to perform at our best. Right now, if someone were to stick a needle in me and measure the cortisol in my blood, it would be higher than it typically is. And that's because I'm giving this talk to you. And that cortisol is doing me a lot of favors, right? It's helping me to focus on what I'm going to say next, keeping myself attentive. Now, on the flip side, as a person with two of my own children, and a full-time job and lots of different responsibilities, I end up with all these things that I have to do that I put off. And so there'll be these days when I block out my calendar with nothing, no meetings, no nothing, and I say, okay, these 19 things I'm going to get done. And lo and behold, as I find myself doing my second New York Times Sudoku, even though I should be working, um, I get like a third of the things done, and that's because my stress isn't high enough, right? And we know that when we get too stressed, right, that's going to impair performance. So we obviously don't want to flood people and overwhelm them with stress, but the idea here is that stress is actually a helpful thing. Stress also is the way in which we get stronger in all sorts of aspects of our life, right? If I want to get bigger muscles, more defined, larger muscles, I have to lift weights. And when I lift weights, those create small tears in my muscle fibers that send this message to my body that says, hey, these muscles need to get stronger next time so you can do this again, right? And I've got to deal with the soreness that comes from that. But that's how I get stronger. As I always tell my mother, who's in her 70s, you've got to exercise a lot. You've got to walk and move because her bones are going to become weaker and weaker if she doesn't use her legs, move, and pound them on the pavement to maintain the amount of bone strength that she has currently. This even applies to our immune system. I don't know about you all, but after my masks started to come off with COVID, my first colds that I had were something fierce. My body was just not as prepared for these viruses. It was not prepared. It was weaker, and as a result, I got sicker. There is a reason why babies can be so kind of gross, right? Putting their hands in the dirt, putting their fingers in their mouths. It's literally evolution saying, expose your body to stress to build up your immune system. So we need stress in order to get stronger. And the same is true for emotional stress. Okay. Again, I know I'm sort of hammering this here, but stress is a good thing. Stress is what builds strength, whether we call that building character, right? Building resilience, building grit. Stress is a good thing. Now, there are some unique stressors for our neurodiverse learners that if we go back to that graph that I showed you earlier, can make it so that our kids are getting into the red, right? Overwhelmed by stress. Now, given that information, we have a bit of a dilemma. We want to teach our kids and support our kids in building resilience, but we also know that we can't overwhelm or flood them with stress, right? And so I really appreciate the delicate balance that we have to have where we meet our children where they're at their capacity. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure to mention that because I didn't want people to feel, well, yeah, stress is all good, but when my kid gets stressed, there's a big meltdown. And I understand and recognize that it's not just as easy as throwing them in the deep end of the pool and waiting for them to swim. So we're going to be thinking strategically about how to help our kids become more resilient. But my main message here is that without stressors, that resilience won't be built. So there are a number of unique stressors, unique obstacles that our students here at Carroll may face, maybe more likely to face than others. And one is stigma. And there's part of the stigma is uh, the frequent self-awareness that the learning process is not going the same way that other same age peers were, right? So that comparison point. It's also part of uh, societal stigma about being neurodiverse, right? So what does it truly mean about myself as a learner to have a specific learning disability, or to have dyslexia, or to have a language-based learning disorder, right? For some, what can end up happening is an internalized sense of helplessness, right? We refer to this term in research as learned helplessness. That really there's nothing that I can do. I have no internal agency to make this situation better, right? Another component is that our learners simply have to work harder, right? Simply have to work harder. So I'll give you an example, right? When we're looking at individuals with, if I'm evaluating an individual with who has possible dyslexia, one of the things that I may give to better understand is a test of working memory, right? And working memory is your ability to hold information in mind in order to do something with it. So, you're in the car, and you get a call from your partner who's asking you to pick up a bunch of ingredients at the grocery store. And working memory is what allows you to hold that information in mind while also navigating the aisles, right? So I'm going to go to produce first because I'm going to get these things, and then the bread aisle. So I'm doing something with that information. Now, for a reader, they have to identify that letter, identify that speech sound, and then blend it together, right? And that is more taxing, right? When you're struggling as a learner in that area, it is simply more taxing to do that mental work, right? So it's more tiring, and that's harder. In addition, not all of our learners, but many of our learners have corresponding challenges with executive functioning. The ability to plan, organize, prioritize, understand where to start, to how to initiate and get going on a task, and building that momentum. So oftentimes there's additional executive functioning barriers that get in the way of the learning process, right? And all of these things can lead to stress and frustration. What we're really looking out for, or what without support, what can happen is what I refer to as the anxiety cycle. And essentially what this is an association that starts to occur between a learning environment and some sort of emotional discomfort. So I'll sort of give you an example, right? In a classroom, I may not know the material at all, not know the teacher, and not know whether it's going to be difficult. But if the association is there, simply being in that classroom environment leads me to experience a negative emotional state, some sort of discomfort, because I am predicting that this isn't going to go well, right? Because of my past learning history. So without even being exposed to an obstacle, my body is responding as if the obstacle is already there, right? And so just being in that learning environment drives that higher cortisol level, that stress response, or even a bit of a fight, flight, freeze response, or what's called a sympathetic nervous system response, which is a bit more of an intense physiological anxiety response that may include, rapid breathing, or rapid heart rate, or shakiness, or becoming sweaty and things like that. Now, adding to this problem, right? The association is there, the stress response is there, and when our body is reacting to that stress, that is a wet blanket on all of our cognitive skills, right? So if we think about, the times where we in life have been asked to problem solve when under lots of stress, in that red zone from that graph, our ability to do that goes down. Our ability to think in a linear way, to problem solve, to communicate effectively, these skills go down, which then creates a stronger association. And so sometimes we can get into this challenging loop. And maybe for some of your students, what's allowed them to break out of that loop is being at Carroll, is being at a school where people understand the learning profile, where people know how to gradually build resilience. But this is a very real challenge that we see a lot. And again, it's hard to intervene to help build resilience in the face of these uncomfortable emotions. So whenever we are faced with discomfort, we are driven to cope with it. We have to deal with it in some way. And coping isn't a value term, right? So to cope doesn't mean something good. Coping is just, what is something that I'm going to do that reduces my emotional distress, right? So there are good forms of coping and not as good forms of coping. And I want to highlight the contrast between adaptive coping and avoidance coping, right? So adaptive coping is doing something that reduces distress so that I can return to that situation that elicited the frustration in the first place, right? So in life, we all take breaks. There are times where we just don't want to deal with stressors, right? I try my best not to think about really stressful things right before bed, right? That's not the best time. But if I keep on pushing it off, if I keep on pushing that stressor and refuse to think about it or avoid it or ignore it, then it's turning into avoidance coping. Right? So avoidance coping is reducing distress just through moving away from the distressing situation. And in life, we all engage in avoidance coping from now and again. And I think what we end up finding is that it nags at us, right? There are like intrusive thoughts related to that stressor that we're avoiding. But the fact is that avoidance coping works in the short term, right? Once we leave an environment, when we say, I'm not going to be in this class, or I'm not engaging, I'm going to put my head down, right? I'm not doing this thing. We often experience a powerful reduction in our overall distress level. It's off of our plate. And those intrusive thoughts or those other sort of negative feelings like shame or embarrassment, they can still be there, but they're not as intense. And as a result, it's still reinforcing. And as I said before, over time, when we avoid, part of the anxiety cycle is when we engage in avoidance behavior, we get this association. I feel better when I'm not doing this thing, and I feel bad when I'm doing this thing, and therefore I'm just not doing it. I flat out refuse. Part of avoidance can also be relying on someone else, right? Relying on an adult to do things for me. Relying on an adult to reassure me and put me back together. when I'm feeling low, right? Or when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And so when we do that too much, there can be this dependence on that sort of what I call co-regulation. So if you have an individual who's feeling anxious, experiencing a lot of anxiety, and they're constantly saying, "Is this bad? Is this bad? Is this bad? Will this bad thing happen? Will that bad thing happen?" And no, 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 don't worry, don't worry, it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. That can sometimes build dependence so that I don't know how to talk myself through things. The only thing that I have in my tool belt is to go to someone else, right? I need someone else to make me feel better. So avoidance coping works, but it can have some real downsides, right? It can have some real downsides to it. But it is easier to learn than adaptive coping, right? And it's a much more natural response. And so it's very common when we face obstacles to seek out avoidance. Now, in life, there are certain things that we can avoid. I'll give you a fantastic example. My kids are both a bit of daredevils, and they like to go to Six Flags every summer. So we take our Six Flags trip every summer, and there's a ride there that is called Superman, and sort of like their big epic roller coaster. My max that I can do is the teacups, right? Like that's where I hit my ceiling as far as thrills go. And my son, for example, is the one that waits in the special line at Superman so that he can go in the very front row. Now, in life, I do not have to go on the Superman ride. In fact, last summer, my daughter was trying to play like a what if game to determine what would lead me to go on the ride, and she said, "Well, what if if you didn't go on the ride, I would die?" I said, "Okay, I would go on the ride." And then she said, "Okay, what if you don't go on the ride, I break my arm?" And I said, "I think I can handle that. That's fine. I won't go." So that's how badly I want to avoid it, and I can, right? I get teased for it with my family, and that's okay. One of the things that as you're thinking about your own child and some of the ways that frustration and discomfort may be playing a role in their life, the question that I would ask you to think about is, what can they avoid, right? And what can't they avoid forever? And if there's something that you're experiencing as they can't avoid this forever, then what that means is we have to seek out ways to help them build the capacity to eventually face it, instead of just seeking to accommodate or avoid those demands that elicit that discomfort, right? So that's really hard. I mean, especially as thinking about yourself as an advocate for your child, right, and helping them navigate the world. That's a really tricky thing as a parent, something that I struggle with too, especially when I'm experiencing my own discomfort in seeing my children's discomfort, right? Because I know that when they're feeling better, I'm also feeling better. And so as adults, we have to, one of the challenges is how do we become more resilient to our children's stress, so that we can gradually help them to learn the skills necessary to no longer avoid the challenge. So here are some ways that we would go about building adaptive coping skills. One is that we really want to be paying attention to how is the child thinking about this challenge, right? What's their, like, what we would call an automatic thought? What's their belief about it? And what you're going to find is that there's some real common beliefs that we all tend to have that promote avoidance coping. One is, I can't do it, right? It's impossible. There's no way. This sort of all or nothing thinking. Another is, I can't tolerate it. It will feel too bad. I can't cope, right? Like this will be the end of the world. That type of thinking. We also might hear things like, everyone's going to hate me, right? They're all going to laugh at me. I will never have any friends. So you see these sort of absolutes, right? I'm stupid. I'm a failure. One of the things that we want to help our child to do is to gently, with lots of validation, challenge them a little bit on some of those thoughts, right? And maybe challenging them requires you to reflect, what happened the last time that you thought that this was going to be the end of the world? Did it get better? Did it get worse? What ended up happening? Maybe you will say, okay, you're predicting that it's impossible that you can do this, that there's no way that you can do it. So let's try to do it. And if we fail, okay, it proves your point. But if we try it, we might be able to succeed. So let's do a little bit of an experiment here, for example, right? What's the worst that could happen is another technique that we might want to use when confronting with one of these thoughts. You're saying that it's terrible. It'll be the worst thing in the world. Well, what is the worst thing that could happen with this situation, right? And oftentimes when you help a child to name it, it turns out that what they were fearing wasn't so bad, right? So these are the types of, we call this Socratic questioning, that we can use with our children as we're helping them navigate. Another way of thinking about it is helping them change the relationship to the stressful experience, right? In recognizing that what is there to be learned, that through this struggle, you will gain blank. And sometimes it can be helpful in pointing out other times in life where they faced and overcome a struggle. I feel like our kids have all had these moments, maybe when they were scared to jump in the swimming pool, and they finally did it, and they just wanted to jump in over and over again because they felt that exhilaration and confidence from overcoming that. So they started out saying, "I can't do this. This is impossible," and then they did it. So we might try to bring them back and help them understand how they can apply that to this current experience. And of course, we want to notice and celebrate successes, and help it point to, these are all the things that you've done, and we're taking this success and we're applying it here. And then, of course, when we're engaging in more helpful thinking, a lot of that focuses on what's within our control. This is really relevant with social interactions for kids, right? It's this child was mean to me, and children are not in other children's control, so it can be very overwhelming to feel like someone was unkind to you. So that what we try to do is, well, what can we control? Maybe it's I'm going to reach out to the teacher, and I, as the child, I'm going to reach out to the teacher. Or maybe it's what the child can say appropriately back to the student if they feel like they've been, mistreated in some way. So when we focus on what's within our internal locus of control, we feel more in control and have greater levels of agency over a situation. Now, there's also behavior tools. I refer to this as learning how to take an effective break. An effective break. I know all sorts of ways at how to take an ineffective break, right? I know that if I am working on a Sunday, as I often try to do, and I put on the Patriots game, I'm not going back to my work, right? That is not an effective break, even though they are terrible. So we need to figure out what are the behaviors that actually work. So it might appear, or a child might believe, that playing video games or going on their phone is an effective break, but then they can't return because there's always one more TikTok video that can be watched. So we need to help children learn what are the things that I can do that make me more able to face distress, right? What actually allows me to feel calmer and more able to return? And a really important point about this is that all of us as human beings, if we've learned these tools, we've learned them when we were calm. We didn't learn them when we were stressed and overwhelmed. If someone came to me when I was just completely floored with stress and say, hey, Alex, do some deep breathing, I would have some choice words in response for that individual, right? But when I am stressed now, I may take some deep breaths because I've had experience with meditation when calm, and I learned, this whole deep breathing thing is the real deal. When I breathe in for a couple seconds and breathe out for 4 seconds, if I do that a bunch of times, I feel better. When I take my dog for a walk out in the woods, I feel better. I know that these things work for me, and that I can come back and be more open and more flexible in my thinking, or come back to a task with a fresh mindset. We have to help our kids practice when calm these different strategies. Because let's say, for example, that they are doing a homework assignment and they're feeling sort of stuck. We want them to have a toolbox where they can say, you know what, I'm going to take a quick break. You know, for some, it's I'm going to go take a shower. I know a lot of kids, especially like high school students, it's like, I'm just going to take a nice shower, come back out, and I'll be ready to go, right? Maybe I'll listen to a few songs, listen to some music. Maybe I'll do a little bit of exercise and get some movement and go around. And so it's not, I can't do it and just push it away. It's, I'm going to take a short reprieve, reset myself, and then return to the task. That's the goal. But one question that you may want to ask your child is, do you think you have any of these tools in your toolbox? Right? What would you do if you were in this situation? Because what we know is that when kids don't have those tools, we end up seeing it in their behavior. When they don't have those tools, we end up seeing it through like becoming more argumentative, right? Or having the tantrum, because those things are ways of reducing distress, right? It's a way of getting the energy out. It just tends to be ineffective, right? Overall. So I now want to just take a bit of time to talk about sort of how Carroll School goes about trying to build resilience, right? Because Carroll is the laboratory through which these resilient skills are built, right? There's always the academic lesson and the academic growth that's occurring, but on the other hand, every academic lesson and opportunity, right? Every tutoring session is learning an academic skill and learning a social emotional skill, right? Because it requires grit and resilience to push through. And so part of the social emotional learning curriculum that's embedded within the classroom, I would say centers on a couple, I mean, obviously this is more than this, but two really important terms that your students are probably familiar with. One is this idea of the productive struggle, right? No one wants to be stuck in the mud, spinning their wheels, going nowhere, right? No one wants that. We want to know that if we're going to spin those wheels, if we're going to use that energy, that we're going to get somewhere. And that's what the productive struggle is all about. Now, it's an interesting point about this because there are times when we're stuck in the mud where it doesn't appear that we're going to get out, but because we keep trying, we eventually do, right? So part of the productive struggle is believing in yourself that if you keep on going, you're going to get there. Another concept that was popularized, it's a great book by this woman whose last name is Dweck, is this idea of the growth mindset. And this comes out of some research where they looked at, where they interviewed some kids about how they interpreted intelligence, essentially, and whether intelligence was static or could improve with effort and and dedication. And those who sort of essentially said, yes, of course you can get smarter. You just have to work harder. You have to commit. You have to keep on learning. You have to be curious. Those were the students that were known as the growth mindset students, right? So, and part of embracing the growth mindset is recognizing that even though we haven't mastered something now, it just means that we haven't mastered it yet, right? We're going to get there. It's sort of the power of yet. Through this process, what the art of this work is around meeting students where they're at, right? There's this concept we refer to as the zone of proximal development, right? Where you're at now, and what's the plus one? What's the little bit more? What's that next step that's out of your comfort zone, but not so out of your comfort zone so as to put you in the red and be overwhelming? We don't always get that. Sometimes we go a little bit too far. Sometimes we don't push enough, right? It's an art, not a science, but that's part of the effort there. And then I think as part of building resilience and also building strong citizens, there's this emphasis on how do we increase independence as much as possible, right? And part of that is supporting self-advocacy, understanding that our students each have their voice, that they have needs, and that there is a way to access those needs and meet those needs through using your own voice, which is so important in life. So important in life to be able to understand how to navigate systems and how to communicate with other people to make sure that your needs are met. And then finally, I think as a part of building resilience, we also have to make sure that that we are appreciating and celebrating the tremendous strengths that come from neurodiversity, right? That these unique brains have many tremendous strengths. And yes, there are some areas that will contribute to frustration. There are some areas where you will have to work harder. But I would also argue that through that hard work, you're going to have greater strength of character. You're going to be better prepared to face further stressors on down the line. You're going to have greater empathy for others who are facing their own unique struggles. And so by understanding and building that acceptance, not only acceptance, but appreciation for it, builds that resilience and confidence. So now I want to talk a little bit about what parents can do to build resilience. So the main message here is focusing on distress tolerance, not removing distress, right? So when confronted with your child who is experiencing some frustration, we want to validate. We want to say, I'm so sorry that this is frustrating, but how can I help you overcome this obstacle, right? How do I help you overcome? That's the big thing, because you want to be your child's biggest cheerleader, to believe in them and their capacity, and they might have to borrow your confidence to help them get over it. And then we want to celebrate the heck out of it when they're able to achieve. Another piece is finding opportunities for exposure to discomfort in all sorts of ways. And these are little things. They can be little independence tasks, for example. One of the things that I often do and have done with my kids for a long time is, if I'm driving and we stop off at a gas station, I will sort of say, here's some money, go get me and you a soda, right? And I've sent my 7-year-old into the gas station with a little bit of money, right? It's like, here, you got to go figure it out. Where are the drinks? Maybe I have to ask someone. It's actually this adorable television show that you can see on YouTube. That's I think it's a Japanese TV show of these mothers sending their children out and being very proud of them when they come back with the right groceries. Another thing is the regular practice of independent coping skills, right? And even setting aside part of your day for that practice. And then the other thing that we want to do is build those habits that promote mental health and resilience. So there's a lot of these things that we could be talking about, but I want to focus on two. One is screen use, right? And recognizing that when we create some healthy boundaries around screen use, we're setting our child up to get a wide range of activities, to meet other needs that they have, to help them be more social in person, as opposed to like just online. But also, there's this real relationship that's coming through in the literature around the screen use and poor sleep. And if there's one thing that if we can help our kids do that promotes resilience, is helping them get a good night's rest, right? So these are the types of habits that will make our children less vulnerable to the stress when it comes. Some other ways that we can build the stress tolerance skills and help is previewing. Previewing what will come next and previewing difficult emotions is really, really important, right? It's almost like an inoculation, like a little bit of a vaccine of, okay, this is coming, so be ready for it. That helps steal our resources for what's coming next. Doing some role playing, helping our children understand the difference between avoidance and adaptive coping, and really reinforcing adaptive coping. And then also, we really want to promote and celebrate this idea that's referred to as riding the wave, right? That every emotion can't last forever. Emotions will come and they will crest, just like a wave. And so this unyielding belief that it feels bad now and it will get better, and it will feel better. And as parents, just as an aside for our own distress tolerance, our work is not riding the wave with them, not riding that roller coaster, right? Because it's so easy. The line that really resonates with me is, you're only as happy as your least happy child, right? And it's this constant challenge around how do we stay away from that, right? How do we not be just as low as our lowest child? Because we also know that these things change. We know from our own experience that we've experienced lows and we've come out of those lows, right? We remember how difficult adolescence was. As an advocate for your child, one of the things that I would ask you to do is to say, what is your vision for your child? What do you want your child to be able to do? What are the skills that they need to be able to do in order to meet that vision of yours? And then say, well, how are we going to teach them these skills, right? And there's this balance, right? Because as we are teaching these skills, there may be some need for some accommodation and modification, because they're not ready to handle the full load. But we want to be able to balance that, right? We might have to put in some accommodations, but we don't want those staying forever if we can help it. We want to teach those skills and build that independence so that we can fade some of those things out. I'm going to end just by giving an example here of one way that we can support our child in improving their independent ability to tolerate distress. And I'm going to use this example of self-advocacy, right? We're seeing, especially in this age where a lot of communication is via text and things like that, that in-person communication is harder. Our kids have less experience with it and are less prepared for those types of demands. And so there's a lot of avoidance coping going on. Maybe maybe your child is coming back to you and they were frustrated about something that happened, and they're talking to you about it, and they want you to reach out to a teacher or help them navigate and solve it. Or maybe they were reluctant to ask for help when they didn't understand a concept, right? And what I would ask in order to support resilience is, I'm not going to remove this challenge. You have to learn in life. You can't avoid these communication needs in your life, but here are some ways that I can help prepare you and build the skills so that you know how to effectively self-advocate. So you could role play. I'm going to pretend I'm the teacher and you pretend you're you, and how will this go? Maybe they need a little bit of help constructing an email. And so you can give them a little bit of like a graphic organizer, a way of helping them structure an email. So starting off with something polite, then making a request, then then talking about, well, I really appreciate if you would listen, right? We can help build their capacity to construct an email. And then for some really reticent kids, we can email the teacher to say, there's something that my child wants to discuss with you. I'm hoping you would initiate that conversation. But it still requires that child to say something that's on their mind, right? So this is just one example of how we are focusing on skill building and not just removing that obstacle. So I really appreciate everyone listening to my talk this evening, and now I'm going to hand it back over to Stacy, who I think might have some questions coming in.
Thank you so much, Alex. So I'm Stacy Daniels. I'm the assistant head of school at Carroll. And I also wanted to introduce Megan Shea, who's the director of counseling. She's also on the call with us tonight. Hi, Megan.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
So Meg is also available for questions. One of the first questions that we have, and just to be clear, parents and people on this call, you can't see the questions of other people. We're not going to name any names. And because of some of the questions, I'm going to kind of paraphrase and maybe chunk some questions together just to try and get as much information out of each answer. But one of them was, can you talk more about perfectionism as opposed to avoidant behavior, and how to help move a kid from focused on the need to get it right and being stuck rather than a desire to move away from the task?
Yeah. So perfectionism is actually kind of interesting in that the attempt to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite would actually be considered a form of avoidance coping, because what we're avoiding is the possibility that we could be wrong, or it could not be good enough, right? And so obviously the approach may be different depending on the severity of that perfectionism. But one of the things that I would want to understand is to use some Socratic questioning and say, well, what if you turned it in and it didn't look perfect? What would happen, right? What would happen? And if that did happen, could you cope with it? Could you be okay, right? Because what often happens within that sort of perfectionistic brain is it's not really well articulated. It's just anxiety, right? It's like it just doesn't feel right. It's just not good enough. And so that would be one thing that I would want to do. Now, a challenge, right? We talked about like riding the wave and giving some challenges. We could actually ask that child to get something wrong on purpose, right? Now, obviously, we wouldn't start with, hey, why don't you get a problem wrong on your test on purpose, right? But it could be even, if maybe, let's say it's a spelling, and really wanting to make sure that every letter is formed perfectly, maybe I'm going to write a letter in a disorganized way and turn that in, right? So we can give ourselves little challenges, because what ends up happening what maintains this cycle is that the child continues to do it until it feels right, and And then as the academic demands increase, they can't keep up. Right? The time taken on each assignment is too much. Or they get out into the world and they're writing an email to their colleagues and they realize they're spending an hour and 45 minutes constructing an email that could probably be written in a minute and a half, right? So that's how, I hope that's helpful, but that's how I would think about perfectionism specifically.
Such a good answer. I'm going to ask you two questions. The second is going to be about homework, just to kind of prime people what's coming. But the first is, we have some questions around social media and screens. And how do I set limits when my kids are saying they're playing with their friends online and they are feeling left out?
And so I assume that the question is saying, like, when I set a limit on it, it means that the child is feeling left out.
Yes, in comparison to their peers, where other parents have set different limits, and
right. So I think that that this is a real challenge, right? I think that one book that I would encourage folks to look into, it's gotten very popular. It's called The Anxious Generation, and it's by this psychologist Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, and he really talks about sort of the negatives of the phone-based childhood, and part of the thing that he brings up is this sort of need for more of a collective action because of this FOMO kind of situation that we have. So I think one of the things that I would be most interested in is, how do we get these kids together to play video games in the same environment, right? And I know that might seem like a small thing, but when kids are together and they're actually talking and conversing in one room, interpersonal, like that is a more high quality social environment than just playing online. I may also, if you're close to the other friend's parents, have a conversation and see if we can't set some mutual limits around when those games are taking place. You know, and then the other thing that I would say is that as a parent, there are some decisions that we are going to make that's in your best interest. And I understand that you're going to be frustrated with it. But I'm doing this because I'm looking out for your best interests, your health and well-being, right? I think it's really hard because there's all these messages that we get as parents that we're good parents when our kids are happy. And I don't actually think that that's true. One is because we don't have a lot of control over that. And two is because part of parenting is raising a strong citizen, a resilient adult and human being. And so there's something that while I wish I could solve it, is just about setting that limit and saying, you know, I need you to be at your best for school tomorrow, right? And so we've got to get off the screen and we've got to do a calm down routine and you know, do something that's going to help us get ready for bed.
That is fascinating, because before we were sort of talking about this notion before we got on this call officially, the idea that we're only as happy as our least happy child. And so it's very hard for us to make our children unhappy when we are also, as a byproduct, going to feel this as well.
Right. And I would also say too that and this is part of generational differences, right? Is that our current generation of parents really feels and benefits from being friends with their children, right? And there's a lot of real benefits of that. I mean, I think that what we're seeing, interestingly enough, although it may not feel this way, is that kids are engaging in less risky behaviors today than they were a generation ago. There's less substance use, there's less criminal behavior in youth. And part of that is because they're more connected to adults and their parents, right? And I think one of the things that teachers are seeing is that kids want relationships with adults even into their teenage years, right? Kids want to be friends with their teacher. It's just a different generation, but being friends with your child makes it really difficult to set a harsh limit because they're going to be really mad at you. it's a challenge.
I'm going to pause that homework question just because you touched on something that I want to ask Meg about, this notion of like, as parents, we want to be friends with our kids, and the idea that kids also want to be kind of friendly or friends with their team of teachers or the counseling staff at Carroll. Meg, how do we sort of build those positive relationships, build trust, and even thinking about some, the positive coping strategies when we're in the position of having to set limits, but also support and scaffold?
Thanks, Stacy. I think so. One of our core values at Carroll is the belonging, the idea of belonging, and helping kids feel like they belong there. And I think teachers do this and make these connections on many different levels and in many different ways. The way our schedules are set up on all 3 campuses are that students are in small advisories and they start their morning there with a morning meeting. Depending on the division, they have at least 2 touch points of the starting the day and the ending of the day in their advisory. And oftentimes there's at least one other touch point with that group, and then also with that teacher who usually is one of their academic teachers. And so the kids have these relationships where they see the teacher as the classroom teacher teaching them, instructing them in a way with materials, and also in the morning meeting, playing games with them, and also having those like small conversations about how was their day, how's their pet, how's their whatever, to show that their interest and build that relationship. And I think because of the fact that the teachers play many roles, they're the advisor, they're somebody students go for support when they're having a challenge. They have these touch points through the day where the teacher sort of can have that knowledge, like, looks like you're not having such a great day. What's going on? Can we help you? Because our teachers know our kids so well. And they see the teachers as people who care about them, and in the class who are going to set limits to help them learn and to hold them accountable for their material and their work. And so I think that those relationships, that's a big piece of it. And then I think we really value and recognize that unless students feel safe in the environment, unless they feel that they are sort of in their, what do I want to say, our feelings, I guess it's just safe in that environment, then we're not going to get our best work out of the kids unless they feel like they can trust the teacher, that they can trust this place to be a place where they can make a mistake and learn. And I think that we, model that. A responsive classroom is our sort of overarching social emotional curriculum. And one way that responsive classroom really talks about things is modeling. Teachers model the same behaviors and expectations they want for kids. So we model and we build into our day a lot of work on developing self-regulation skills, developing coping skills. A lot of classes start with sort of a mindful moment. We're coming into the class, let's do this together to kind of get ourselves settled. And the idea again with responsive classroom is you model it, you try it, and then you practice it. And I think that's one thing that we do with both social emotional skills and with our academic skills.
Thank you so much, Meg. Thank you. Alex, 2 questions. One is about homework and sort of helping students manage the overwhelm of homework. And Meg, you might have something to say about that. And then kind of related, but there was a question about this idea of complimenting, that like some of our kids like do their best when, praise, and how do we sort of de-addict a child from that kind of praise wheel?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first, just about homework, right? So first of all, the fact is that at Carroll, the goal of homework is, we're trying it, but if we are overwhelmed by it or not understanding the material, that's a self-advocacy issue, right? That's where we would, as a parent, would say, how are we going to talk to the teacher about this and learn the concept and get the support that you need, right? And that's the goal. So that's first. And we can also see homework and sort of a more manageable level of frustration with homework as an opportunity to practice our resilience skills. And so you know, the first thing is, let's think proactively, right? I want to be in a really good place when I sit down to do my work. So what do I need to do to get myself in that good place, right? What helps me sort of get calm and feel good? Again, I've come across a lot of people who are like, I just take like a really nice shower, you know, and that helps me sort of reset. Or like, you know, I'm just gonna have a cup of tea, right? And that's gonna get me in a good place so I can sit down and focus. And then we can think about positive self-talk mantras, right? Like, what can I say to myself that's going to motivate myself through this? Another thing is building in little pieces of reinforcement, right? So knowing that when I get this piece of the homework done or this subject done, I'm then going to reward myself with something, with blank, right? The only challenge we have to look out for, of course, is you can't reward yourself with something that you can't get off of, right? So if the reward is going on TikTok and then it's lo and behold, it's 4 hours later, that's no good, right? So we've got to choose something where we can build in sort of mini reinforcements to keep our motivation going. We can learn strategies to recognize when that frustration is beginning to turn into overwhelm and learn how to set a timer and take a 5-minute break. So there's all these different habits that can be practiced. And really, this is less about, I have to get this homework done, this has to look right, and more about, I'm practicing this process of how do I push through a difficult task. Now, the other piece was about sort of praise addiction. So I think that you know, one of the reasons why we praise is because praising what an individual does well is way more effective than criticizing what someone doesn't do well in order to shape behavior, right? So for example, it's more effective to say to a child, nice job telling me that you are upset, versus don't throw a tantrum, right? Because don't throw a tantrum doesn't give the child what to do. So there are real benefits to praise. Now, praise can also be overused, especially when it comes to labels, as in, you're so good at that. You're so talented at blank, right? You're the best at blank. We really want to be reinforcing the process, right? You tried so hard. You practiced for great job practicing, you know, your clarinet for a long time. Like you really worked hard. So I want to really be emphasizing the use of praise around the grit, the resilience, the work, the motivation over the end product. Because sometimes what happens with kids when they really get addicted to the praise is that it's really a form of avoidance coping, where they're asking for reassurance, right? So they feel insecure, like, I'm not good at this. And then either we or they are seeking that, no, you are good at that. You are good at that. See, you're good. And of course, you know, people can be good at things, but also need to get better, right? People can be not the best at things, but can become good at them, right? Whatever that means. And so that would be the emphasis, less on like weaning off per se, but more on focusing the type of praise on the process.
I feel like we do a lot of that at Carol. Meg, I'm sure you would agree. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sticking with that sort of the challenge of when with reassurance with the child who wants to try something new, and they're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And so I think it can be it can be hard for the teacher as well to not be like, yes, that answer is right. Yes, that answer is right. But what we try is we'll say, okay, you try 5 and I'll come back and check in with you. When you've done 5, say it's math problems, you try the next 5. And when the 5 are done, I'll come back and check them for you. So, and it's also sort of delaying that reinforcement of feeding that anxiety piece.
One question we had here was, it relates a little bit to the perfectionism question, but it was about feeling judged when they make a mistake, and then just being like feeling very sort of outed when one corrects or sort of acknowledges a mistake. Do you have any feedback on ways to provide constructive feedback in a parenting situation?
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple of things, right? One is that it sometimes can be helpful to preview before critical feedback is coming, right? So one of the things we want to understand is what is it about that feedback that is so distressing? And oftentimes that comes down to some type of thought or meaning making. So getting the criticism means I'm stupid, right? For example, is like a common interpretation that leads to a high level of reactivity or anxiety in response to a critique. And so we want to like couch it, be like, listen, I'm about to give you some critical feedback, right? Still love you, right? We're all good. Here it comes. You ready for it, right? And then I would deliver that. So that's one way of like buffering the impact a little bit. But I would also want to do some exposures, right? And help your child understand that what we're working on is helping you hear feedback and be okay. Because just like me with the Superman ride, hearing feedback, unless you're perfect, is not something that you can avoid, right? We will all hear feedback. And so I think that it's not shying away from that, right? But it's preparing the child that it's going to happen. The other thing that I would say is Megan talked about some of the relationship building pieces that happen at Carol, right? And that safety and establishing that safety. And I think that that's part of making it a little bit easier to face critical feedback is when that relationship is there, right? And so we can also sort of say things, I mean, we wouldn't do this in school, but as parents, we can say, I love you, and this is coming, right? And a teacher can say, I just want you to know, I enjoy having you in my classroom so much. I am so glad that you're here, but let me tell you something that we need to work on, right? And so we're leading with the relationship before we provide that critical feedback.
And I think I'd just add to that, the other part is, and I'm going to stick here with you and I'm going to help you get this. Like right now, this is hard. And right now you're feeling like, this is overwhelming and you're frustrated. And I'm telling you, this is wrong. And I'm going to stick with you till we figure out how to get it right. And I think that's one of the things that Carol teachers do, exceptionally well.
Just kind of thinking maybe a last question here that I wanted to ask. I want to be mindful of everybody in the audience's time. We've read a lot about kind of adverse childhood experiences and when there's too many and when there's too little and how that kind of shapes our kids. And I think there's the pandemic but how do we tell when there's too many or too little? Like when is this, where's the balance between those things, between like a sort of an appropriate level of challenge and when it's just too far and they're over the edge?
So I think that that what you'll see when you've pushed someone beyond their coping capacity outside of that zone of proximal development is you'll end up seeing a level of dysregulation that is then impacting their brain's ability to engage in those problem-solving processes, right? So, typically in life, we have our prefrontal cortex, that part that's around goal-directed behavior, that's operating. But when we become overwhelmed, this evolutionary piece kicks in that turns off the prefrontal cortex and goes to a much more primitive response style, right? And this makes sense from evolutionary purposes. If there was a bear that was attacking you and your family, you would not want to stop and have a conversation about the best way to avoid the bear. You're just running. You're just fighting. You're just hiding. And so what we tend to see is that the child's ability to think flexibly is gone. They're stuck. And at that moment, it's just about de-escalation and waiting. And one of the best things that we can do when we recognize that is to be quiet, right? When we see that level of dysregulation, what that means is that your child or another human being in your life is not processing language, right, in a meaningful way. So the ability for them to take in and understand your feedback is less. So we just have to wait. And these moments of big emotion are a learning experience, right? It's a learning experience of, okay, so maybe we're not where I thought we were with this skill. So how do I scale the demands back a little bit? Or it's a problem-solving discussion with your kiddo where it's like, I thought we were here, you thought we were here. How do we work better together going ahead in the future? So even though it can be really tough to see and to manage, it's also an opportunity for learning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Alex, it has been a pleasure. Meg Shea, is always such a pleasure. Should you have additional questions, please feel free to email them to us. And any that we didn't get to, we will take care of. But we've got admissions@carrollschool.org or parentquestions@carrollschool.org. Either one of those, we will monitor those. And if any kind of follow-up conversation, if you wanted to get in touch with Megan Shea or any of the counseling staff, happy to. Alex, thank you so much. We are so grateful that you are our consulting psychologist.
Thanks.
Thank you. And with everyone, a fantastic evening.